Ahoy there, and welcome to my channel, where I might one day occasionally do a thing. Today, in fact, I'm going to be trying something a little different. Different in that I'm actually going to be doing something instead of not doing something. This is going to be a Commander deck tech, just to help me feel comfortable using my voice and this microphone. Also to make some hashtag content. But hey, if someone tells me they like it, or gives me literally any attention at all, I might do another one, maybe to show off one of my personal decks that's not quite so budget. I'll also be following the example set by the Commander's Quarters and breaking this deck up into 10 different tactics. Please don't sue me, Mitch. For this deck, I'm going to be using two of the uncommon partner commanders from Commander Legends. First up is Ich-Tekik, Salvage Splicer, a 1/1 human artificer for 4 and a green. If you ask me, he looks a little like Cyborg. When Victor Stone here comes into play, we'll get a 3/3 golem creature, and whenever an artifact is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we'll get to put a +1/+1 counter on Ich-Tekik as well as every golem we control. While finding high-value golem cards was a little difficult, we have a full 20 cards in this deck that either are golems, become golems, or create golems. Our primary strategy with this deck is going to be to create an army of massive giant robots. All the while, we'll also be growing Ich-Tekik himself. Riding shotgun in the command zone is Dargo, the Shipwrecker. As a massive 7/5 giant pirate, poor Dargo is too big to fit in any ship. His casting cost is a similarly high 6 and a red. Luckily for Dargo, he can benefit from the ships breaking around him. When casting this big boy, we can choose to sacrifice any number of artifacts and or creatures. For every artifact or creature sacrificed this way, he'll cost 2 generic mana less. For every artifact or creature sacrificed earlier in the turn, he'll also cost 2 generic mana less. While at first blush it seems this maritime disaster is nothing more than a big beater with trample, his unique casting ability allows him to really shine in combos that chain casting him over and over in order to take advantage of triggered abilities. While this deck in particular is a little too budget to afford some of the cards that would enable those combos, we still have a few things that make it possible. This deck has a lot of high-cost spells, so to start things off, let's talk about how to stabilize our mana base. First up, there's Font of Fertility. It's no Wayfarer's Bauble, but this 1-drop green enchantment serves the same purpose. For 1 and a green, we can sacrifice Font of Fertility to search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Next is either Cultivate or Kodama's Reach. Both of these are 2 and a green for a sorcery that lets us search for 2 basic lands, put 1 into our hand, and 1 onto the battlefield tapped. Outside of the rare deck where the arcane subtype matters, these are both effectively the same cards, and their prices aren't too dissimilar. So feel free to go with whichever one has the art you prefer. Then there's Sakura Tribe Elder, affectionately known to some as Steve. 1 and a green for a 1/1 Snake Shaman. We can sacrifice Sakura Tribe Elder to search for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped. A sorcery for 3 and a green, Circuitous Route will let us search our library for a mountain or a forest, as well as our Gruul Guild Gate or another mountain or forest. We'll then put those lands into play tapped. Normally, Ordeal of Nylea would not be effective land ramp, but because of its +1/+1 counter synergy, I couldn't pass up putting it in the deck. An aura for 1 and a green, when we sacrifice Ordeal of Nylea, we'll search our library for 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. When the enchanted creature attacks, we'll put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then, if it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters, we'll sacrifice the aura, triggering its second ability. If everything is going according to plan, we'll have plenty of +1/+1 counters on our creatures, and so we shouldn't have too much trouble triggering that ability. Next, we have 3 lands that each tap for colorless, while also allowing us to search out basic lands for when we need them. Blighted Woodland and Myriad Landscape will both let us tap and sacrifice them to search for 2 basic lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Blighted Woodlands ability costs 3 and a green and will let us search for mountains or forests in any combination. Myriad Landscape, on the other hand, costs 2 to activate, but will only let us search for 2 mountains or 2 forests. It also comes into play tapped. Warped Landscape is also 2 mana to tap and sacrifice it to search for either a mountain or a forest. That will come into play tapped. Warped Landscape itself comes into play untapped and will give us 1 colorless mana. We'll also be running Gruul Guildgate and Gruul Turf. Gruul Guildgate is a gate that enters the battlefield tapped and taps for red or green. As one of the Ravnica bounce lands, when Gruul Turf comes into play, we'll bounce a land back to our hand and it will come into play tapped. On subsequent turns, it can be tapped to add red-green. We'll also be making use of some creature-based ramp as well. One of the interesting new cards from Commander Legends, Rootweaver Druid, is a 2/1 Elf Druid for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, our opponents will search their libraries for 3 basic land cards. Our opponents will keep one of them and then give us the other 2. This could be a risky play. If none of our opponents take up the offer, we'll have overpaid for an elite vanguard. Passing up free mana is difficult, and hopefully it's an offer our opponents can't refuse. If we're lucky, we'll have paid 3 mana to gain 6 lands that don't even come from our deck. As long as just 2 of our opponents take the offer, we'll at least be even with those 2, and the third player will be out in the cold. Gillanra, Caller of Wirewood, is a 1/2 Elf Druid for 2 and a green. They can be tapped to give us 1 green. When we spend that mana to cast a spell with converted mana cost 6 or greater, we'll draw a card. With 16 spells that cost more than 6 mana, we should be able to get a few draws out of this. Elena, Kessish Trapper, is another of the uncommon partner commanders. A 4/3 human scout for 4 and a red. She has first strike, but more important to us, she can be tapped to add an amount of red mana equal to the greatest power of creatures we control that came into the battlefield this turn. And, spoilers for later, but don't worry, this deck won't be breaking her bond. Then we have Leafkin Avenger, a 4/3 elemental druid for 2 red-green. We can tap it to add green for each creature with power 4 or greater that we control. For 7 and a red, we can also have Leafkin Avenger deal damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. Next up, we have 2 very similar cards with Rishkar, Pima Renegade, and Zhang Yanggu, Wildcrafter. Both of these are 2 and a green and will let us put +1/+1 counters on creatures. Rishkar is a 2/2 Elf Druid that puts the counters on when he enters the battlefield, while Yanggu is a 3 Loyalty Planeswalker whose -1 ability lets us put +1/+1 counters on a creature. What we're most interested in is that both of these will allow creatures with +1/+1 counters on them to be tapped for mana. For Rishkar, that mana will only be green, while Yanggu will allow us to add red or green. Last here, we have 3 cards that instead of providing us with mana, will instead reduce the cost of some of our more expensive spells. A 3/2 construct for 3 generic mana, Foundry Inspector will make artifact spells cost 1 less to cast. Joyra's Familiar is 4 mana for a 2/2 Flying Bird. It will also reduce the cost of artifacts by 1, as well as all of our legendary creatures and planeswalkers, which this deck seems to have a lot of. As perhaps the most expensive card in the deck, Ugin the Ineffable is a 6 mana planeswalker with 4 loyalty. By upping his loyalty by 1, we can exile the top card of our library face down. We'll then create a 2/2 colorless spirit, and when that creature dies, we'll be able to put the exiled card into our hand. This effectively manifests the top card of our library. At the cost of 3 loyalty, Ugin will destroy any permanent as long as it's not colorless. While both of these abilities are incredibly useful, Ugin will also reduce the cost of future colorless spells by 2 mana. This should come in handy when it comes time to cast the handful of 8 mana artifact creatures later in the deck. Speaking of those high-cost artifacts, it's time to take a look at our golems. These will be making up the core of the deck. Starting us off quickly is Gingerbrute. It's a 1/1 for 1. It has haste, and by paying 1 mana, it can't be blocked this turn except by creatures with haste. On top of that, since Gingerbrute is made out of cookies instead of clay, we can pay 2, tap and sacrifice it to gain 3 life, just like the food you'd buy from the store. While a situationally unblockable 1/1 may not seem like much, once it has a few +1/+1 counters, this cookie won't be the only thing crumbling. But if we do want to have it for a snack, cracking it as food will also get us +1/+1 counters for all of our other golems from Ich-Tekik's ability. Moving on, we have Sad Sam, a staple card and for good reason. A 2/2 golem for 4, when Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield, will tutor for a land and put it into play tapped. When it dies, we get to draw a card. Arcbound Reclaimer is a 0/0 for 4, but thanks to its modular ability, it comes into play with 2 +1/+1 counters. When the Reclaimer dies, we can move all of those +1/+1 counters on it to another artifact creature. More importantly, by removing a +1/+1 counter from Arcbound Reclaimer, we can put an artifact from our graveyard on top of our library. This won't actually give us any card advantage, but it does let us reclaim some of our artifacts, just like it says on the tin. Next, we have Golden Guardian. It's a 4/4 for 4. This would be efficiently costed if not for its Defender ability. But by paying 2, Golden Guardian will fight a creature that we control. When it dies this turn, we get to return it to the battlefield and transform it. When it transforms, it becomes a land, Gold Forged Garrison. We can tap it to add 2 mana of any one color. We can also pay 4 and tap it to create a 4/4 Golem token. While many of our creatures are big and buff, Golem Artisan will help us get damage through. It's a 3/3 for 5. For 2 mana, Golem Artisan will give an artifact creature +1/+1, flying, trample, or haste until the end of the turn. While Jorva's Familiar and Foundry Inspector from earlier will help make our golem cheaper, Lodestone Golem will hinder our opponents. A decent enough 5/3 for 4, Lodestone Golem will make non-artifact spells cost 1 more to cast. While Lodestone Golem will affect us as well, ideally, it will give us enough tempo that we can cast some of our larger artifact spells without being hindered. Geode Golem is a 5/3 for 5 mana. It has Trample, and when it deals combat damage to another player, we can cast our commander from the command zone without paying its mana cost. This will allow us to cast our commander at instant speed. We will, however, have to pay the commander tax. Next, we have Howling Golem. Whenever this 3 mana 2/3 attacks or blocks, we'll be able to draw a card. Unfortunately, our opponents will be able to as well. This Walking Howling Mine is a very friendly card. Not so friendly are our next 2 Golem, Meteor Golem and Sundering Titan. Meteor Golem is a hefty 7 mana for a 3/3 that comes in like a wrecking ball, destroying a permanent that an opponent controls. Sundering Titan, on the other hand, is a massive 7/10 friendship killer for
crap. Let's go with Altar Golem. That should be big in multiplayer. You still have to tap 5 creatures. Relic Golem. It's cost efficient, but you can't attack with it. Screw it. We're gonna go with Ancient Stone Idol. It's going to put us over budget, but it's a big card. Ancient Stone Idol is a statue of Kosi the Trickster. This aspect of Kozilek is a 12/12 that costs 10 mana. Fitting for the Zendikar God of Trickery, it can be flashed in. This is the best way to cast it because it will cost 1 less for each attacking creature. Kosi here also has Trample. Being such a tricksy god, Kosi knows that it's good to not lose your head. That's why, when he's defeated, his falls off and continues attacking. Next, we have a few more giant robots, each of which is at 8 mana. Bosch, Iron Golem, is a 6/7 and another of the deck's many legendary creatures. Bosch's beefy, oxidized body is helped out by Trample. Even better, we can pay 3 and a red to sacrifice an artifact. By doing so,
Bosch will deal damage equal to the converted mana cost of that artifact to any target. The Colossus of Akros is a 10/10 with abs bigger than most people. It has a defender and indestructible. By paying 10, we can make it monstrous. In addition to putting muscles on top of its muscles with 10 +1/+1 counters, being monstrous will give the Colossus trample and allow it to attack. Taking full advantage of its high converted mana cost is Maelstrom Colossus, a 7/7 with Cascade. While it won't help with these other 8 mana cards or the next one coming up, when we cast it, we'll exile cards from the top of our library until we come to a non-land card that costs 7 mana or less. That card will then be cast as well. The rest of them go to the bottom of the library in a random order. The last of our metal monsters, Phyrexian Triniform, is a massive 9/9 for 9. When the Triplicate Terror dies, it will do its best Wormcoil Engine impression, breaking apart into 3 3/3 Golem. As if that weren't enough, it's capable of coming back for more thanks to its Encore ability. By exiling the Triniform from our graveyard and paying a staggering 12 mana, we will create a token copy of it for each of our opponents. Each of these token Triniforms quite literally has our opponent's name on them. Each Triniform has haste and must attack its designated opponent if able. At the beginning of the end step, we sacrifice them. Assuming a standard 4-player game with all of our opponents still in play, this is 12 mana to create 3 9/9 hasty golems. Those golems will then be sacrificed and break up into 3 3/3 golems each. The ideal scenario here is paying 12 mana to get 9 3/3 golem tokens. While I'm not entirely certain, I do believe that our robot army will see the Triniforms die, and Ich-Tekik's ability will put a +1/+1 counter on them for each of those 3 golems. This would mean that we'd be paying 12 mana to get 54 power across 9 bodies, not including any counters given to Ich-Tekik himself or any other golem. The floor for this is paying 12 mana to get the Triniform, the golem tokens, the counters, for a total takeaway of 12 power across 3 bodies. Next up, we have a handful of golem facilitators, the first of which is Golem Foundry. This 3 mana artifact sits around gaining charge counters whenever we cast other artifact spells. By removing 3 of those charge counters, we can create another golem token. We also have 2 more Splicers. These 1/1 green human artificers are members of the Vicious Swarm, just like Ich-Tekik. When these Disciples of Vorinclex enter the battlefield, they'll bring a friend with them. The more reasonably costed of the 2, Vital Splicer will create 1 golem when it comes into play, and by paying 1 mana, we can regenerate any of our golem. 3's a crowd, and Maul Splicer brings the crowd with her. She comes into play with 2 golem tokens, and will give all of our golem trample. As a 2-drop mana rock that comes into play tapped and only provides colorless mana, Guardian Idol is something of an inferior Mind Stone. For 2 mana, we can carve the word Emet into the Guardian Idol's forehead. It will become a 2/2 golem until the end of the turn. It won't collect +1/+1 counters while it's not a creature, but they will stay on it when it turns back into a mana rock. While it's not as good as a Mind Stone, it can hang around and dodge certain board wipes. One such board wipe is a Lava Brink Floodgates, a 3-red artifact that taps for red. Such an efficient rate of return for colored mana is a little too good to be true though. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they may add or remove a Doom counter from Lava Brink Floodgates. If it has 3 or more Doom counters put on it this way, you sacrifice it and it deals 6 damage to each creature. While this can often be outside of our control, our creatures will hopefully be big enough that it doesn't matter. We'll also be putting in a few treasure cards. A 1-drop red Goblin Pirate Impulsive Pilferer is a 1/1 that creates a treasure token when it dies. Like the Triniform, it also has Encore. By paying 3 in a red and exiling it, we create an Impulsive Pilferer for each of our opponents. Whether our opponents block these Pilferers or not, At the end of the turn, we'll sacrifice them, getting another treasure for each. We also have Bratz's Bounty, a 6 and a red sorcery that creates a treasure token for each land that we control. Treasure tokens are incredibly useful in this deck, since when we tap and sacrifice them, that will trigger Ich-Tekik. Treasures are also useful for Dargo. When we sacrifice a treasure, that reduces Dargo's cost by 2. The mana we get from the treasure can also be used to pay the red mana in Dargo's casting cost. Getting a lot of treasures can give us very big benefits. Last in this section, we have 2 utility lands. Dread Statuary is a land that taps for colorless mana. By paying 4, we can turn it into a 4/2 golem until the end of turn. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon is another colorless land that taps for 1. By paying 2, we can tap it to gain 1 life for each colorless creature we control. Conveniently enough for us, most artifact creatures, and all of the ones in this deck, are colorless. Now it's time for some offense. Domri, Ancap of Bolas, is 1 red-green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker who really needs to Google Murray Bookchin. Are we even still doing that joke? Ticking Domri up 1 will add red or green to our mana pool. Any creature spells we cast that turn can't be countered. By ticking him down 2 loyalty, this edgy little brat who likes Rage Against the Machine but really doesn't seem to understand the lyrics will have one of our creatures fight an opponent's creature. Just like in a mosh pit, which is what anarchism is about, right? Moving on from Ron Paul 2024, we have Elena's Girlfriend. Halana, Kessish Ranger, is a 3/4 human archer for 3 and a green. She has reach, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we can pay 2. If we do, that creature will deal damage equal to its power to another creature. While we do have a few dinky little artificers working on our machines, and throwing tech support at the problem won't do much good, knocking up some of our beefy robot boys and launching those at the enemy should hit about as hard as those Dark Souls archers whose longbows are bigger than they are, and throw out arrows that look like Werner von Braun worked on them. After that, we have 2 modal spells. These spells are either an instant, or we can play them as our land for the turn. Colony Ambush is 2 and a green for an instant that lets our creature fight an opponent's creature. Kazul's Fury is 2 and a red for an instant that lets us sacrifice a creature and deal damage equal to its power. While the front of these cards are an overpriced Pounce and Fling, we can also play them as lands. Colony Territory and Kazul's Cliffs. Both of these come into play tapped, but will provide 1 green or red mana respectively. Because these could be played as lands, I took that into account when building the deck. In this next section, we'll talk about a few ways to protect our creatures from whatever our opponents are doing. First, we have Titanic Brawl, which really should have been in the last section. It's an instant for 1 and a green that costs 1 less if it targets a creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it. That creature will then fight a creature we don't control. If this spell costs 2, then we've probably screwed up somewhere, or we have Lodestone Golem out. Then we have Blossoming Defense. For a single green mana, at instant speed, we give a creature +2/+2 and hexproof until the end of the turn. We'll usually want to use this to protect Ich-Tekik, but we can also help out any other creature we have as well. To save ourselves from board wipes, we have Inspiring Call and Rapid Vigor. Inspiring Call is an instant for 2 and a green. We'll draw a card for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures will also gain Indestructible. Rapid Vigor is another instant that regenerates each creature we control. While our game plan is going to have a lot of artifacts going to the trash, sometimes we need to dig around in that trash for treasure. Duretti, Scrap Savant, is a 3 red, 3 loyalty planeswalker. By raising his loyalty 2, we can discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. By ticking him down 2, we can sacrifice an artifact. If we do, we get to return an artifact from our graveyard to the battlefield. On the off chance that he survives long enough for 10 loyalty, his ultimate will give us an emblem that whenever an artifact is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Duretti's -2 is a reference to Goblin Welder, another card that's in our deck.
Whoops, not anymore, too expensive. Made some cuts for Ancient Stone Idol. Felden of the Third Path is a 2/3 human artificer for 1 red. By paying 2 red and tapping him, we can create a token that's a copy of a creature in our graveyard. It'll be an artifact that has haste and will be sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. While we can't use him as removal like we can with Goblin Welder, we should be able to get a lot of value out of reanimating some of our larger creatures over and over again.
Next, we have more utility lands. Each of these 3 lands taps for 1 colorless mana. A Buried Ruin and Sequestered Stash can both be sacrificed to return artifacts from our graveyard. By paying 2, we can tap and sacrifice Buried Ruin to return an artifact directly from our graveyard to our hand. With Sequestered Stash, we pay 4, tap and sacrifice it to put the top 5 cards of our library into our graveyard. We can then put an artifact card from our graveyard on top of our library. The Sanctum of Ugin, meanwhile, has a triggered ability. Whenever we cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, we can sacrifice it. If we do, we search our library for a colorless creature card and put that into our hand. While the intent is obviously some big-ass Eldrazi, it works just as well for any artifact spells. This deck has some big beefy boys, and now it's time to take advantage of those beefcakes. Garruk's Uprising is an enchantment for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we draw a card. We'll also draw a card whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under our control. On top of this, all of our creatures will have trample. Bonder's Enclave also cares about us having a creature with power 4 or greater. Another utility land that taps for colorless, we can pay 3 and tap it to draw a card, but only if we have a creature with power 4 or greater. Next up is Mouth. A sorcery for 2 and a green, it creates a 3/3 green hippo token. While a 3/3 green hippo isn't all that great, once Mouth is in our graveyard, we have access to Feed. A sorcery with Aftermath for 3 and a green, will draw a card for each creature we control with power 3 or greater. Armorcraft Judge isn't as concerned about power, but when this 3/3 Elf Artificer for 3 and a green comes into play, we'll draw a card for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter. Shamanic Revelation is a sorcery for 3 green that will draw us a card for each creature we control. It also has Ferocious. We'll gain 4 life for every creature we control with power 4 or greater. This should provide us with a decent little life buffer. Next, it's more utility lands. The Hideaway lands, Mosswort Bridge and Spinerock Knoll. When these lands come into play, we'll look at the top 4 cards of our library and exile 1 face down and then put the rest on the bottom of our library. Then, when we fulfill the conditions, we can pay 1 mana of the appropriate color and cast that spell for free. For Mosswort Bridge, if our creatures ever have a combined power of 10 or more, we can play the spell. Spinerock Knoll requires an opponent to have been dealt 7 or more damage in the turn. Keep in mind that this is damage and not loss of life, but both of these can be activated at instant speed. This means that if an opponent damages an opponent for 7, you can activate Spinerock Knoll, or if one of your golems dies and the rest get counters, Mosswort Bridge can be activated. Our robot army is going to be getting a lot of +1/+1 counters, so it might come in handy to proliferate them. When we proliferate, we can add a counter of any type onto a permanent or player that already has a counter of that type. Plaguemaw Beast is a mangy, wet-looking 4/3 beast for 3 green. By tapping it and sacrificing a creature, we can proliferate. Karn's Bastion is yet another utility land that taps for colorless. By paying 4 mana and tapping it, we can proliferate. Throne of Geth is a 2 mana artifact that we can tap and sacrifice an artifact to in order to proliferate. And we've also got Plane-Wide Celebration. This 5 green sorcery will allow us to create 4 2/2 citizens, return 4 permanents from our graveyard to our hand, gain us 14 life. Or, more accurately, we can proliferate. This is a flexible card though, so if necessary, we can take other options as well. The word proliferate doesn't even feel like a word at this point. Before we get into the secret Dargo tech that everybody probably already knows by now, we're going to add in a few big dumb Timmy artifacts. Ingenuity Engine is an artifact that costs 7 mana and has Cascade. Again, that means that when we cast it, we'll exile cards from the top of our library until we come to a non-land card with 6 mana or less. When it's on the battlefield, we can pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice an artifact to return an artifact we control to our hand. This could be Ingenuity Engine, allowing us to cast it all over again and start over. There's also Aetherworks Marvel, a 4-mana legendary artifact that gives us an energy counter whenever a permanent is put into our graveyard. By tapping it and paying 6 energy, we can look at the top 6 cards of our library and cast one of them for free. These next 2 cards are a little devious. Gonti's Aetherheart is a legendary artifact for 6 mana. When it or another artifact enters the battlefield under our control, we get 2 energy counters. By paying 8 energy counters and exiling Gonti's Aetherheart, we get to take an extra turn. Another addition to our deck's surprisingly long list of Ugin-themed cards, Ugin's Nexus is a legendary artifact for 5 mana. If someone wants to take extra turns, Ugin's Nexus will cause them to skip that turn. While this might come in handy at some point, though keep in mind it will prevent you from taking an extra turn from Gonti's Aetherheart, what we really want is the second ability. When Ugin's Nexus goes from the battlefield to the graveyard, we'll exile it, and then we get to take an extra turn. And then we have yet another card that will allow us to cast some of our more expensive spells for free. See the Unwritten is a sorcery for 4 green. We'll reveal the top card of our library and put 1 creature onto the battlefield and the rest of the cards into our graveyard. It also has Ferocious, meaning if we have a creature with power 4 or greater, we'll be able to put 2 creatures into play instead of just 1. While most of this deck has focused on Itchy and his robot friends, it's time to talk about Dargo's abilities. Because Dargo continues to see the creatures and artifacts that have been sacrificed in a turn, even if he gets cast and goes back to the command zone, each new cast will continue to benefit from the cost reductions from earlier in the turn. To illustrate this, if you sacrifice 3 artifacts and cast Dargo for red, if you sacrifice Dargo, the next time that you cast him that turn, it will still only cost a single red mana, because the sacrifice that put him back into the command zone will pay for the additional commander tax. In future turns, the tax will get out of hand, but used properly, this can be a game-winning combo. So, here we have a few ways to essentially turn Dargo into a chain gun. First is Warstorm Surge, an enchantment for 5 and a red, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, it will deal damage equal to its power to any target. We also have Where Ancients Tread, another enchantment for 4 and a red. Whenever a creature with power 5 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, Where Ancients Tread will deal 5 damage to target creature or player. Unfortunately, a lot of the best sacrifice outlets that are repeatable aren't available to us because this is a budget deck, and I wasted that budget on Planeswalkers from War of the Spark. Some of these cards that you could include if you have them in your collection or don't mind shelling out the money are Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, Blasting Station, Goblin Bombardment, or Altar of Dementia. Also useful would be Stalking Vengeance, Hissing Iguanar, Mana Echoes, Spiteful Prankster, Terror of the Peaks, or Vicious Shadows. This deck does, however, have 2 relatively cheap sacrifice outlets. With Claws of Gix, an artifact for 0 mana that we can pay 1 and sacrifice a permanent to. That will give us 1 life. Or Makeshift Munitions, an enchantment for 1 and a red that we can pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact or creature to deal 1 damage to any target. While these aren't as efficient, they should be able to get the job done. The best thing for Dargo is actually Brass's Bounty. While he may be too big to fit on a ship, every pirate loves a good treasure. With a big booty, we can sacrifice each of those treasures to gain 1 mana as well as reduce Dargo's casting cost by 2. This should give us enough mana that even with our inefficient sacrifice outlets, we'll be able to deal enough damage from our enchantments to kill everyone. If not, well, Victor Stone can mop cleanup. Rounding out this deck, we have 12 forests and 11 mountains. According to Scryfall, this deck will cost $49.60 from TCG Player. That isn't taking into account any shipping costs, and you know that they're going to split this up into like 4 or 5 different packages. Anyway, that's the deck tech. If you liked it, please let me know. If you didn't like it, also let me know, because I like attention, and the algorithm can't really tell the difference. I'd also like to thank all of the people who support me on Patreon, or who are just supportive of me emotionally. If you liked this, you can give me money. I'm always fond of that. I'm Aspel on Patreon, Aspel on Cash App, Rory Aspel on both PayPal and Ko-fi. I don't usually do deck techs like this, but I might in the future just because it was kind of enjoyable, and I got this done in like 2 days, which is, usually I take like an entire month to write a video essay that I then never turn into a video. You can read those at medium.com /@estrusflask. I'm also at estrusflask on mastodon.social and Aspel on Reddit. I don't currently have a Twitter because I'm once again suspended. This time for saying that I hope the president had a stroke. You can find all of those relevant links down in the thing. And, go home. The deck tech's over.